Timberwolves fan, the one and only Luke Easterling from Athlon Sports. What's up, brother? How are you?
I'm doing great, my man. How are you?
Oh, man, I'm better than the Timberwolves. I was watching that last night on Inside the NBA, and me growing up being a diehard Knicks fan. Uh, in that trade, I was like, hey, it sucks to lose Julius Randle, Karl Anthony Towns. I wasn't sold because I thought, all right, is he tough? Is he going to be able to handle it? He's been fantastic for the Knicks, but the whole Julius Randle experiment hasn't worked out too good for you guys, huh?
We didn't understand it then. Like even the trade, like back then, like it's not like we didn't think that Towns might be moved at some point, but it just felt like weird and out of nowhere. And the haul that we got, like we didn't understand the fit with Randall coming back. Like it just didn't make sense. So, but the entire existence of a Timberwolves fan doesn't make sense either. So here we are.
I actually had a Timberwolves jersey back in the day because of Wally Szczerbiak, fellow Long Islander. Love that guy. Went to Cold Spring Harbor. Big Wally Szczerbiak guy. So I had, ironically enough, as a kid that grew up in Long Island when I was probably 11, 12 years old, a Wally Szczerbiak jersey. So still got love for the T-Wolves era, and those Kevin Garnett years were obviously incredible. All right, Luke, let's get into it. The big news yesterday, Liam Coen staying with the Buccaneers, not going to Jacksonville. And I've asked this question to a couple of people. Is it more because he was happy and comfortable here in Tampa Bay, or like how much of it was that and how much of it was he was looking at, Trent Baalke, who now we know is not there. Trent Baalke, Jacksonville. Like how much of it had to do with where he was going to go and where he was at?
I think it's never just one thing, or maybe never, maybe not never, but I think it works together. I think both of those things play off of one another. I think the fact that he and his family are so happy in the Tampa Bay area and see the stability of the franchise, the culture that is there, the way they were able to be successful in year one, and how much looking ahead to year two, you can already see. I mean, there's a damn good chance that entire starting offense is back. And when you look at guys like Bucky Irving, you look at guys like Jalen McMillan and Graham Barton, guys that are going to be going into their second years and don't have to spend that first however long through the offseason and training camp and doing all those installs, they can pick up where they left off and be even better, which is kind of scary for as well as they played this year as rookies. All of those things combine, and then you look at the other option, which is Jacksonville. Do they have that culture? Absolutely not. Do they have that organizational stability? Absolutely not. Do they have some talent on the offensive side of the ball? Sure. But they don't have it in terms of the confidence that you would have in it, right? You got a star quarterback in Trevor Lawrence, but you're paying him a lot of money, hell of a lot more than Baker Mayfield's getting paid right now. And you have, some talent at running back, but inconsistency. You have some talent at wide receiver, but inconsistency and injury issues. The offensive line is really questionable across the board. And so you start to, if you make a pros and cons column, even just from a football side of things, both in terms of off the field and on the field, it just doesn't match up at all. And so when you take that side of it, and Trent Baalke is his own subject, right? I mean, now that he's out of the picture, I think that clears the way for a lot of things for Jacksonville. But at the time that decision was made, that was absolutely a part of it. And that's nothing new in Jacksonville. Jags fans have been, crying for that for years. I'm never going to be the, hey, this person needs to lose his job kind of guy. That's not something I feel comfortable doing in any sense. But you can't ignore the fact that these top coaching candidates, that happened a couple of years ago when they ended up with Doug Peterson, the top candidates want to go to Jacksonville because there are good things about that place, and Trevor Lawrence is at the top of the list. But when you have to consider all those other things and they want to hand you a general manager whose history is questionable at best, that's why they kept getting turned down. So it's a little bit of everything, but I do think at the end of the day, the thing that tipped the scales for Liam Coen, based on what I know, is just the fact that their family loves Tampa Bay, and they've found a community and a home there that they really, really love. And they weren't ready to leave it. Definitely not just for the first head coaching opportunity that came along. And if you look, he hadn't interviewed anywhere else, hadn't had any requests. So if that was the only team that was going to offer him a job, I think he's looking at Ben Johnson, who left Detroit after last year being like, oh, he's the hot name. He decided to stay and see what else was out there. Now, a year later, he's the Bears head coach. He's got Caleb Williams, Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, all that stuff he's working with now. Obviously, Buc fans are hoping that doesn't happen with Liam Coen next year, but we got at least one more year to enjoy his offense, looks like.
Yeah, what do you make of the whole Trent Baalke thing? Because listen, as far as I know, and talking to some of the people that I know in Jacksonville, like Shah Khan's a great guy, and what do you need? What do you need? We'll write you a check, and he doesn't try to micromanage. obviously he's misplayed his hand when it came to Trent Baalke. He's trying to show the guy some loyalty and show him, but I think even Shad kind of looked at it as like, man, like the one consistent thing with this entire equation is that people don't want to work with my GM, and good on him for kind of realizing that a change had to be made. But that's also, some people are going to look at that and go, why did it take so long, right? Why did it take so long to get rid of Trent Baalke? So what happens to the general manager position? Do you think that's something that needs to be taken care of before the head coaching? Because we know Patrick Graham and Robert Saleh are two names that have been linked with that job. Like, where does Jacksonville go from here?
Yeah, I think, in terms of Baalke, I think that part is obvious. I do think that there was just a loyalty that Shad Khan felt to him for whatever reason. And these businesses are all relationship businesses, right? Sometimes if you have a guy that's your guy, you don't want to let him go, even if the evidence on the professional side of things continues to build, and you just don't want to make that move. That's your guy. Maybe you're friends. Maybe you feel loyal to that guy for whatever reason. And I think that just reached a tipping point for him. I think that another coaching cycle where you had Ben Johnson, who I think was heavily interested in that job, Liam Coen, who I think would have been as well. And when both those guys turn you down, you have to look at that part of it and say, hey, man, we're going to still be friends, or we're going to still stay tight, but, for the health of this franchise, it's clear that something isn't right. And, they're also, they're not stupid. Social media speaks loudly these days, and whether it should or not, it's not hard for ownership, for GMs, for any of these teams in any professional sport to get the pulse of the fan base, right? It's not hard to know how they feel about certain things. And I think the Jags fans have made their feelings on Trent Baalke known for years now. And so I do think it did just reach a point where he couldn't ignore the fact that was the elephant in the room. That was such a huge factor in all these head coaching candidates just not wanting to go on board with that and to have him as their GM. That being the case, as they look ahead, I do wonder how they're going to order things, right? Because if your concern was we can't hire the head coach we want because we don't have a GM they want to work with, that makes me think that maybe he'll do it the other way around, where he'll, if Shad Khan identifies, and whoever he uses in the front office that's still there to, make those decisions, I think that they'll want to identify the head coach they want first, and then deal with the GM part once they've got that part. Usually you want to do it the other way around, but I think the way things have gone for them, I think it wouldn't surprise me if they're like, hey, let's just identify the head coach we want. Make sure we get that guy in the building to handle the on-field stuff with the roster we already have. Because like I said, there is talent on that roster. And then afterwards we can deal with the longer term, franchise building part of it and find the right GM to marry with this coach's scheme. We know about that in Tampa, right? How locked in Jason Light has been, both with Bruce Arians and now, Todd Bowles, in terms of drafting and developing and scouting talent that fits their scheme. And I think that's why they've been successful. The Jags will want to do that type of thing with the way they structure that relationship between the GM and the head coach as well.
Yeah, you mentioned Jason Light. Everybody was rejoicing because Liam Coen saying that he was going to stay here, but unfortunately for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and their fans, it looks like John Spytek is going to be headed out to Las Vegas to work with Tom Brady and the Raiders. And I saw you making some comments on social media yesterday as well about the impact that he's had with this team. And he's been an intern, he's been a director of player personnel, head of scouting. Like, he's done so many different jobs in the last 20 years in the National Football League, a very widely respected guy. And now he's going to get his opportunity. What did you make of that news when it came out yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, it's disappointing on one hand, right? But this is the price of success. This is the front office version of what just happened to the Lions, right? The price of having an elite offensive coordinator, an elite defensive coordinator, is that other teams are going to poach them and give them head coaching jobs. And that's the price of being successful at developing these people. So on one hand, it speaks to, again, the culture, what Jason Light has built in that front office. But unfortunately, you can't hoard all the best talent in the league forever, and it's not even really right to do so. I know there are some franchises that feel that way, that they'll block interviews and they'll block certain things, at least before there were rules in place to try to prevent that. But I think it's very bittersweet for Jason Light, as it is for Bucs fans. But he's got to be so proud. He's got to be so excited for his guy, because again, anybody who's been around that building, who knows John in any type of way, knows that he absolutely deserves this and has for a long time. The fact that I love how much Jason has always talked about delegation and putting people in positions to do what they do well, something he had to learn from his early years as the GM that he'll admit to. He wasn't the best at that at the beginning, but learned how to make sure he built a strong staff, gave them, their runway to go do what they do well. And I think Spytek's development is a prime example of that. But no, man, I mean, you've seen his day 2 and day 3 press conferences. You've seen, the when he has spoken to us, you can just tell that he gets it. It's one thing to be able to identify talent. It's one thing to be able to, gauge whether or not players are going to be a good fit for your locker room and the culture and the type of, that's not an easy thing. This is a human business. It's not an easy thing to understand. Hey, I'm watching this guy's film, and now I'm interviewing him in a sterile, hotel room in Indy, and, I'm watching him run a 40, or I'm, meeting with him for 30 seconds at the Senior Bowl to get his phone number. It's hard to determine in those interactions whether or not, as the Bucs would say, this is a Buccaneer man, right? This is the I am that man, that Levante David, type of archetype. But I think John Spytek was just so good at it, man. I mean, and the way he communicated that to us in those press conferences, in some of those interviews that he did, and with the team and the digital content that they put out. I mean, you could just tell his ability to translate what type of player makes this team great, and find all of those guys, and his ability to communicate it to us, to say, hey, this is what we saw in this guy. This is where we think he'll fit. This is what we think he does well. And I mean, the last few draft classes, I mean, look, over the last 5 years, the Bucs have won a Super Bowl and then 4 straight division titles. That's not an accident. It's a great team sport because it takes everybody, but John Spytek was instrumental in that aspect of it, developing talent that you knew was going to fit, and then handing it to the coaching staff and say, do the rest. So again, I'm really happy for John, but man, it's going to suck to see him elsewhere.
You got that right. And I think you bring up a good point. Good general managers, good directors of personnel find good players. I think the best find good people. It's not just about fitting in the scheme on the field every Sunday. It's about the guy that fits into your locker room, the guy that's not going to go AWOL when things don't go well, the guy that's going to pick up his teammates. Of course, you got to have talent and you got to produce. I understand that aspect of it. But you could tell to a man, 2 years in a row, this team goes and hits the skids in the middle of the season. Nobody jumps ship, right? And yeah, a lot of that has to do with the leadership with Light and Bowles, and it could trickling down to Golston, Levante, and Mike Evans. But it's also the young guys, man. It's also the guys that they bring in, realizing like, hey, we can't be a discontent. We can't be a malcontent in here. We can't just start going into business for ourselves, wrestling term. But that's just the way. That's the way that they've done it. They've established that culture. And I think culture could be an overblown term when you're talking about sports, but I think in football, because you have so many different personalities, it is huge that everybody is on the same page. You mentioned Levante David. Happy 35th birthday to the one and only Levante David, number 54. It's funny with you joining the show today. You're my brother's favorite guy when it comes to mock drafts. He said something to me. He's picked out 2 people over the years that he's really liked. Trevor Sikkema being one of them, and we know Trevor has been able to kind of climb the ladder and do some great things after being here in Tampa with Pewter Report and then the Draft Network and now Pro Football Focus. And then he's like, I really like this guy Luke Easterling's mock drafts. And I was like, and he knows I don't like mock drafts. I'm not usually like I don't read a ton of them, but I was like, you know what? Luke's actually one of my favorite mock draft guys too. This is like a couple years ago. It was so funny. So when you told me yesterday that you were coming out with a mock draft today, I was like, all right, good. Because what I like what you do is you don't fall into the same like lazy narrative. And I can tell that you do your homework, because there's certain franchises that clearly aren't going over certain guys. And then you'll watch some of these mock drafts like, are these guys paying attention like to what these teams put out? And you clearly do. And we'll get to the Bucs draft picks in a second, but I am just enamored with what is going to happen with the first 5 picks this year, because it's all right. Well, is it going to be 1-2 quarterback? Is there going to be a little bit of a wait and go like, let's take best player available? The Tennessee still has Will Levis there, but it doesn't seem like they're sold on him. Do they move out of that draft pick? You actually had Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders not going 1 and 2. I've seen that with other places. What gives you the impression that the first quarterback off the board, if there is no trades, will be the Giants at number 3 and possibly Shedeur to Las Vegas? And yes, I'm giving everybody Athlon Sports. Go check him out at Luke Easterling. Go check him out because he's got everything on there. So you can check out the entire mock draft, but to give you a little peek behind the curtain there. But what gives you the impression that those top 2 teams won't go for a quarterback this year?
Well, I got to say first, you mentioned my guy, Trevor Sikkema. It's so funny. About 10 years ago when I got my job at USA Today, when they pegged me to run Draft Wire, and try to build that up. The first person I called was Trevor Sikkema back then. He was doing his own site called With the First Pick, or Road to Radio City. That's what it was called. He had his own blog, Road to Radio City. And I called him up and I was like, hey, man, I'm going to start building this thing up. I need you with me. And that was the first guy I brought on to do that.
Great.
And so, yeah, to see him on NFL Network and PFF and all the stuff he's doing is so great. He deserves all of it, man. What a talented dude. What a great human being. So to be in the same sentence with that guy, I'll take that all day long. It's fine by me.
Awesome.
But no, in terms of this draft, man, I think it's just, we make fun of the NFL all the time for overdrafting quarterbacks. Okay, it's tale as old as time, right? It happens all the time. But there's also been moments in recent draft classes where I do think the league has swung the pendulum the other way and said, you know what? No, we're not doing that. We're not going to get
Kenny Pickett year.
The Kenny Pickett year is the prime example.
Malik Willis, everybody was like, "Oh, he's going to be a first-round pick," and it was like, then draft day came, it was like, "No, he's not. He's not."
I'm telling you, man. I think that was a huge mile marker in the whole league's development of saying, you know what, when it's not there, we're not going to do that. We're not going to keep doing that. And again, there's 32 teams, 32 owners, 32 GMs. It only takes one, which is why Kenny Pickett goes 20, but the other guys don't come off the board till the third. I think that was a huge moment. I don't think this class is quite that bad, but I do think it's the kind of class where if you're Tennessee and Cleveland at 1 and 2, and yes, you need a quarterback. Their situations are very different, right, in terms of the financials with the Deshaun Watson situation and with Will Levis. Will Levis is on a rookie contract for at least another couple of years. Deshaun Watson, no matter what you do, you're stuck with that for at least another few years. But if you want the on-field product to be better, you better get somebody else in the meantime. So for them, it's a matter of, to me, there are two, I hate the word generational talents because I think it's so overused and doesn't mean anything anymore. I think Travis Hunter is genuinely a generational talent. But the interesting thing to me with him is his generationalness is the fact that he can play two positions at a really high level. If you make him two players, I don't think he's a terribly generational wide receiver. And I don't think he's a terribly generational cornerback. I think he's a really good both of those things.
Right.
So if you're going to play him at one of those positions and not have him play full-time at the other, which, again, I'll just be shocked if he's able to do that at the NFL level, is he actually a generational prospect if he's not that type of guy at one of those positions? I think that's the interesting conversation you have to have if you're going to take him at one, which the Titans might do. But Abdul Carter, to me, is the other guy that I just can't see myself taking Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders over that guy. In terms of an elite talent at a premium position, a guy that gets after the quarterback, an incredible athlete, explosive, physical. I mean, he basically played on one arm through the college football playoff and was still the best player on the field with some really talented players, even in this draft class. So for me, if I'm Cleveland and Tennessee, I know I need a quarterback, but I also know that there's just no way I can live with myself if I reach for one of those quarterbacks and pass up a guy in Travis Hunter, who, again, I think is a rare talent in his versatility, but at the very least is going to be a very, very good wide receiver or corner, both premium positions in today's NFL as well. And then a guy who just gets after the quarterback as well as anybody. I don't know. To take a borderline first-round grade for me, which is what both of those quarterbacks have right now, at 1 or 2 over those really, really, truly elite prospects in this draft, I'm not saying it won't happen. I'm saying this early in the process, it makes me cringe to think that they would. So I'm gonna try to help them out in the mock drafts as much as I can and make them make the smart picks.
There you go, buddy. Yeah, I'm with you. And I know I'm in the minority saying this. I think Travis Hunter as a prospect just terrifies me because of that, what you just said. Like when you look at somebody, and I made this comment a couple months ago, Travis Hunter is like Shohei Ohtani. Right, guys that are doing things that we've never seen or haven't seen in many years, decades, a century. But even when Ohtani gets Tommy John and can't pitch, he's still dropping 40 bombs and stealing 50 bases, right? Like there's no doubt in your mind that he's one of, if not the best designated hitter in the game. Like he's a force. But with Travis Hunter, is it more of the overall package and being able to do something that we haven't seen? And we know there's a jump between the collegiate and the pro level. Is he going to be able to do it in the NFL? We don't know. And that uncertainty would terrify me picking him because, all right, let's say you do pick him and he's just a receiver. Okay. I mean, looking at the guys that we saw, is he better than the guys this year? Is he better than the guys that we just saw this past year? Like, just purely as a wide receiver prospect, is he better than Malik Neighbors? Is he better than Marvin Harrison Jr.? Is he better than we saw Brian Thomas? Like, I don't know. I don't think so. That would terrify me. All right, if he's just a corner, all right, are you going to draft a corner at number 2? Right? Like, then you take out of the prime position where we've seen in the past, pass rusher, left tackle, quarterback. Like, you don't see that many of those other positions unless they're, way the hell up there. I'm petrified. I would stay away from Travis Hunter because the uncertainty. I'm with you with Abdul Carter. Just watching that guy, and you can tell like there was times where his arm was like not 100% functional, and he's like leaning. He's doing like the shoulder lean. I'm like, dude, I'm drafting that guy. It was. Give me all of that. Give me the Shedeur Sanders versus the Cam Ward. You had Cam going to the Giants, you had Shedeur going to the Raiders. Is it more of a fit thing, or do you think that Cam is just a slight edge above a guy like Shedeur? Because for me, I like Cam. I think at times he tries to make just that play where he just does a little bit too much in terms of football over Shedeur. He's accurate as hell, and I think the thing that people knock him at is that he's Deion's son. Just like he's a fairly accurate passer. He's kind of the last of a dying breed, more of a pocket guy, not going to really get outside and run for 80 yards like we see from some of these other guys. Why those two guys in those spots?
Yeah, I mean, they're real tight for me in terms of grades. They're really 1A and 1B, and I think the thing that might separate them in either direction, I do think where they land is going to be a fit thing, and that's really hard to do in mock drafts because you're just not going to be in those rooms, right? You're not going to be having those conversations. Can I do the national pundit thing and say, oh, the Giants will pass on him because they don't want to deal with Deion? I could do that if I want to, but I hate playing that game because I don't know. I'm not,
right.
For all we know, the Mara family might be thrilled to bring in that attention and that angle of it. You're in New York already. You can't be scared of that, right? You can't shy away from that stuff. So for all we know, that might not be a problem at all. I think I look at potential. I look at upside. That's the terms we use. But what is the best possible, scenario for this guy's ceiling at the next level? And that being the case, I think Cam just has a slightly higher one because I think he's got a little bit of a stronger arm, and I do think he's more comfortable and more effective making things happen outside of the play structure. Not that Shedeur can't do it half of the time by necessity, because his offensive line, at least 2 years ago, was really, really bad. And so it's not that he can't make things happen. I think Cam's a little bit of a better athlete. I think the variance in his throwing, patterns are a little bit wider. You have some really high highs and some really low lows. Doug Farrar, good friend of mine who works with me at Athlon Sports, said he's got some great Jameis and bad Jameis to him.
Oh, we know all about that here.
You know what I mean? Where you just like these ridiculous, crazy, the Chicago Bears play to Mike Evans where he's running all over the place and trucks it 50 yards down the field. But he's also got some of that. How in the world did you make that decision to make that throw? So I think that there's a little more boom or bust maybe with Cam. I just think, my rule when I'm taking quarterbacks high is if I pick the wrong guy, I'm getting fired anyway. And if I pick the higher floor, lower ceiling guy, it's just as likely that he's going to be decent but not good enough to keep me from getting fired as I am going to get fired because I took the high ceiling guy and he busted. So to me, and Lamar Jackson was a huge litmus test for that rule for me, right? Where I was just like, this quarterback class, which had a lot of first rounders in 2018, I saw flaws in everybody. And nobody with the ceiling that I thought Lamar had. Obviously, Josh Allen proving to have that as well. But I put my eggs in the Lamar Jackson basket back then, and I said, this is the guy that I think, if I'm going to swing on a quarterback in the first round, give me the guy that I think can be a superstar. I think Cam Ward has a little bit more of that than Shedeur does. I think Jalen Milroe has a lot of that, but I think his variance is even wider. I think his floor is way lower, and I think his ceiling might even be a little higher. So he I think is the real wild card in that group. I think he's going to be the most intriguing one to watch. But in terms of the team fits, I don't know, man. It's really splitting hairs at this point. I think that's what gave me the nod for Cam Ward. But if you flipped him, I really wouldn't argue.
Yeah, Luke, you definitely have the best pin tweet of all time, thinking that Lamar should go 1. That's one of the best twin tweets, pin tweets on Twitter. You had Lamar number 1 overall before everybody. There was people out there when you were tweeting that saying that the dude should be a freaking wide receiver. Yeah, that really went over like
I
a light
tried, man.
bulb.
I gotta play my hits. I Lord knows I have plenty of freezing cold takes.
We all do.
We gotta take the slam dunks when we get them.
Before I let you go, let us know about these Buccaneers picks, man. You have 3, it's your 3-round mock draft there on Athlon Sports, again, at Luke Easterling. And I like it, man. Yeah, James Pierce Jr. for the Buccaneers with their number 1 pick, or their first round pick, the edge from Tennessee. You had Carson Schlesinger, the linebacker from UCLA. What a great story, from walk-on to first team All-American. And then you have Quincy Riley, the Louisville corner, at 6 feet tall. That is a guy that, I know I saw some things and watching some of his tape. Maybe he doesn't stick his nose in there and tackle maybe like a Todd Bowles corner, but you got to switch it up a little bit, right? Like, I think that's the one draft pick I look at and I go, maybe they do go in a little bit of a different direction. He still got some size, but they need a little bit of a ball hawking mentality. So take us through those 3 picks if you could.
Yeah, I think at the first, and this is where I get to cheat a little bit, because obviously I know more about that organization and the structure than I do every other team. I really work hard to learn as much as I can about every other team, but it's never going to come close to what I know about what happens in that building. So James Pierce, the pro comparison that I keep getting from everybody I trust is Brian Burns with him. And so that piques my interest, right? When you look at a guy who's tall, he's long, he's extremely explosive off the ball, kind of inconsistent, especially as a run defender. So he's not a complete player, but dang, man, like the Bucs just need somebody who can get after the quarterback. Yeah. Like, let's figure out the rest later. They can stop the run. They have edge guys that are pretty good. They need a guy who can take over a game. And so if you have to take a little bit of a risk on a guy who's a little more inconsistent, that's what your coaches are for. That's what your position coaches are for. Bring in young guys with talent. Let me fix your technique. Let me make you a more well-rounded NFL professional. I can't teach you that explosiveness. I can't teach you that just knack for getting to the quarterback and wrecking games by yourself. I think James Pierce brings that, and I think the coaching staff can figure out the rest. So if you're telling me I could get Brian Burns 2.0 and fill that edge need for the Bucs, that's fine by me. Schlesinger, like you said, great story, great, walk on and everything, but he's a little undersized. He's not like the huge old school linebacker, but so was Levante David when he came out of Nebraska. And obviously I'm not going to compare anybody to a future Hall of Famer, in my opinion, but Schlesinger is just a guy that again, if you look at the way this team values certain traits, both physical and in terms of locker room and leadership and effort and those types of things, Carson Schlesinger just checks all of those boxes, man. And when you look at a linebacker position that, especially if Levante is not back next year, I think that could go either way still at this point. But even if he is, that second inside linebacker spot has just been a huge problem against the run, against the pass. Like, they just haven't found a guy, to really fill that role. And so they need to invest, I think, a high pick in that position. I think Schlesinger would be a great fit. You mentioned Quincy Riley, and I agree. He'd be a little bit of a deviation from what they normally go to, but I think it's time. I think we could very easily see Jamel Dean be Carlton Davis this year, where he's got a high cap number, but very little guaranteed money. I think they move on from him at some point this offseason, whether it's for a draft pick or something to save that cap space, and because he just can't stay healthy. I love Jamel Dean as a person, and when he's healthy, he can be an impact player. He just can't stay healthy, and he is inconsistent. And again, there's a lot of cap space to be saved there for a team that could use as much as they can without having to restructure contracts. So I think maybe they do go in another direction. He's not as big, he's not as long, maybe not as physical, but he's versatile. He can play outside, he can play inside. And again, this team, like I said about the edge position, they've got some decent players. They need to take the freaking ball away. They have got to make splash plays on defense, or you cannot win football games. And that is what killed them against Washington. They were on the field all day long because you can't take the ball away. You can't set up short fields. The Bucs ran, 42, 45 snaps on offense in that game because they're never on the field. You've got to take the football away from the other team, and they need more people, particularly in the secondary, who that's their trump card. That's their top trait that sets them apart, the ability to create those takeaways. And I think Riley would be the fit there.
Yeah, it's a great point because I think I spent more time on the field after the game than Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers offense during the game. Luke
Probably.
Easterling, Athlon Sports. Go check him out at Luke Easterling, my favorite mock draft guy around. Luke, this has been a lot of fun, man. Let's do it again soon. Enjoy the rest of your week, my brother.
Absolutely. My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.